I have been slowly learning MicroPython using the Raspberry Pi Pico W, and getting the hang of it. And thought I'd take the jump to trying the Wi-Fi section of it. So I went to the Raspberry Pi Foundation has this getting started with it on here, and has a little tutorial group of tutorial pages on how to get started. You're just making buttons to turn the onboard LED on and off, and it's also bringing in the temperature of the Pico, the onboard temperature thing on that. And I worked through this and worked out pretty good. Mostly copy and pasting, and I tried changing a few things up and everything, but my HTML skills are sadly lacking. I can understand what's going on, but if I have to change anything, I really have to uh, go find some information on it. So after getting it done, I said, well, let me try something on my own. So in my last video, I was playing around with servos using MicroPython, and ended up with a little library module, and also uh, using a analog input from a potentiometer to set the uh, servo position, you know, mapping the position from the pot values to the uh, servo. I said, well, I know that you can do in HTML, you can do sliders, or they call them range sliders or something. And I said, I wonder how much trouble that's going to be to do that. And um, I'm a big fan of looking on and doing Google searches, and I'm pretty good at Google searches. But as far as MicroPython wireless and using range sliders in your HTML, and I didn't come up with much of anything on that. I was really surprised, but didn't seem to be a whole lot out there. I've followed quite a few people that are doing programming on these microcontrollers and everything, and I even bugged them, a couple of them. I said, "How about doing one on how to program a range slider?" And that's all been in the last week or so. And um, in the meantime, I've been playing around with it myself. I said, well, it can't be that hard. Well, if I knew HTML better, and if I knew, of course, I'll show you, we got to get into JavaScript as well. If I knew those languages even halfway well, it probably would have been fairly easy. But it was a struggle. Let's just leave it at that. So anyhow, we'll start off with what we know, what I know, what I could get out of this tutorial here. That we're doing this, setting these lights on and off, and um, what's happening is we're sending back this string here at the end of our um, uh, socket, our return, our web page, our 192 dot whatever, and you're just adding this onto the end of it when you send it back, light on or light off, and it's called a form action. So when you submit the button, when you press the button, we're creating buttons, and when you press it, it's just sending back this action, it's called. And my first thought was, well, range sliders are inputs too. This is an input button. I said, well, let me wonder if there's any way to do that and have it send back, instead of this, something dynamic like the um, um, value of the slider. It may be there. It may be a way of doing it. It seems like the easy way, but I didn't really find that. And maybe HTML just isn't up to that task, because it's a dynamic thing. It's not a coded thing where you're just sending this. With this one, you're either sending lights on or lights off. You're sending one or the other. So they're not sending any kind of values in there. So not sure how that would work. So anyhow, what I did find was that most of the sliders, like I said, I don't know much about HTML, but I like W3 Schools as a tutorial, and they have that sandbox that you can play in on their thing and do online coding and see the results in a terminal window or in a window, and that worked out pretty good. But in looking at it, you're dealing with events and stuff like that. So this is a different website on input types, and this is the range input types, and you're getting the value, and you're getting a string if you're uh, doing that. That's fine, but uh, it works out either way. But it says you have two different events, change and input events. And when I was over on the W3 schools, I said they were using I forget what they were using. I think they used input, and I'll show you the difference. But I knew that I wanted to do it one way, and I said, well, we'll see how that works out. So I think it's this one. Okay. So you can see that this is actually running, so we can actually change this. Our value here is using the on input. So this is using the input event, and this other one is changing this value by on change. So I'll show you the difference. So if I'm moving this slider here and I'm holding my mouse button down and sliding it back and forth, the value's changing, but the change event only happens when you release it. Now, if you click on another space, you also get the change event because you're releasing your mouse. So the value on input is basically holding it down and moving it. So you're getting a change in value anytime the slider moves, but the change event is only happening when you release the mouse. So I guess that like I said, the two ideas they came up with this value one, and it's so many when you're sliding it, your Python code, it's reacting to so many different things that it was hard to figure out what was happening, because you can get this line of stuff. I'll show you when we do the code, but you get this line, it's a paragraph of stuff that gets returned every time you return these values on this. So it was better to have it only when you clicked on it, only when you chose, when you let go of the mouse. So I decided that that's what I wanted, is the change event. But like I said, getting back to it, here's our input. It's called a range input. This one's set up, this is the basic one they had there. Of course, I wanted a servo, so I went from 0 to 180 and started off with a 90 on my thing, but we'll see that. But I kind of copied and pasted a lot of this, but this script is actually just taking whatever the value here is and putting it in this one or this one. So we're using the JavaScript just to reset the screen thing. That's what this output inner HTML, this value, because we call this output demo, and we call this C output C demo, which is what I added up here for the change value. Anyhow, took that rabbit hole and figured out, okay, So then we had to figure out what we could do, and a lot of there's a lot of different ways to get the. Um, uh, I found at least three different ways to get the information back to using sockets, getting it back to the Pi Zero as a thing, and the one that I chose was XML HTML request, and uh, there's something called jQuery, and there's something else called fetch that could have been used too. That I saw reference to, but I decided to use this XML HTML request thing. I guess the best thing to do at this point is just go to my code. So, like I said, a lot of this is don't want to see. Well, it doesn't matter now. You got my. If anybody wants my SSID and password, you have to find me to get that information. Okay, so we got the. We're importing network and socket and time, of course. Now I have that slow servo class thing that I have and that I worked on in my last video. I'm going to include both these files in my GitHub and link to in case somebody wants to play with it. I don't know whether kind of fun to have something that works right off the bat, so it worked for me. But anyhow, so we're importing the servo and then machine we need. Don't know if we needed this and that because the servo also should import machine. So I might not have needed machine here. I think that was left over from something else I was doing on the code. But what you're doing here is you're creating the web page and using this format string thing. You can do this and get that. And the only difference was, is I tried this first. I said, okay, well, I'm going to just copy and paste it from the W3 schools over there. And it come up with an error, and I had to figure out what that was. So the format string uses the curly brackets for getting custom input into your function, and but we needed that because that's what the JavaScript functions use, was a curly bracket. So you needed to do double curly brackets so it didn't think that it was something to do with the string formatting. It just let it go through. So any place that you have a single curly bracket in your HTML or JavaScript, you need to put double curly brackets on in your when you're doing your Python thing on it. So we're just doing that. Like I said, you can go back to the Raspberry Pi thing to see how all that's doing, because like I said, and this connect is all part of the Raspberry Pi function. This is function, and they open the socket. So we're getting our connection. Well, let's go down to the bottom. So you're doing this thing. You're connecting, getting an IP address. Then you're opening the socket with that IP address, and we're calling that connection. And then we're doing the serve function, which is our main thing that just keeps looking for things to come back from our web page that we've served, and we're acting on that. So we'll go back up. So we're connecting. That's our using our Wi-Fi information and connecting. Then once we got that, we're using the bringing in the IP address, and we're making a socket. And the 80 is the regular web sockets. I'll talk about that, doing something different with that in a little bit. But and then you're serving it down here in your connection. And this is, like I said, this is where you end up with your while true and everything. So we're creating the servo object that we need on pin 0. It's on pin 0 is where the servo object is connected. And this connection accept and all that is just I got from the other from the Raspberry Pi site. They probably explain it what it's doing, but I really don't know what that is. So anyhow, but you get back this request is what we're looking to get back, and when it comes back, it's like I say, it's a paragraph. You'll see that it's a lot of stuff, and we only are using part of it, and like I say, we're printing it out so that we see what that is. But then what you want to do is you want to get the part out of it that you need. So probably the best thing to do to explain this is to run this code, and then we'll see what we're doing it. And then after we do that, we're resending the web page again. And then I think this is a keep alive type thing. I'm not really sure what that is. And it was from the Raspberry Pi site. They probably explained it, but I don't remember. And we're just sending the HTML as well. And we're closing it. And then you go back and you try to reestablish contact with it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. So anyhow, so we've got our prompt here. Oh, I found that to do this, you want to have your files on your Pico. I would think that they would run it from your machine, but they don't. So I ended up putting them down there. I also have this extra test one that I was working with as well down there. But these files are on a Pico, and I didn't realize it. It was probably the first time I put files actually on the Pico, and they put the square brackets around it to tell you that you're working from the Pico board. And so we got the two libraries. So got this one selected, and I'm going to go ahead and hit run. So I've ended up with this thing where a lot of times my it decide to connect this time, but a lot of times I don't know whether it's my Wi-Fi connection or what, but 50% of the time it'll just go connection, waiting, and I've found that if it waits over 5 or 6 times, it's not ever going to connect. So I just have to stop it and restart it. If anybody has any idea why that's happening and how to fix that, like I say, I'm using that happens on right out of the Raspberry Pi Pico tutorial right from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So it may be on my end, but I just, a lot of times I don't get a good connection. But now that we're connected, we're using it tells me where you're at. So we can actually open up a web page, and I've actually already got it open. I'll have to refresh it. But you can see, let me move myself out of the way here, that we're at 192.168.1-233. So that's what you type in your web browser. But we'll refresh it because it should start at 50 or 90. And now we can look at what comes through. All this came through. This is where we were, and all this comes through. This whole paragraph comes through every time. And they all have this stuff going on in them. And but we'll actually move. Let me go back to this. We'll actually go back to our servo and we'll move it. And you can see that we don't have a change value until it actually changes. So there we go. So now we have the 43. But if you noticed my code up here, we're splitting all that paragraph to find the part that we want. So if we, here's where it starts. So this is a smaller paragraph. Sometimes they're bigger and sometimes they're smaller. But this is where this paragraph is starting that just got sent back when I let go of the mouse on that. And it's coming back, get space slash slider question mark 43. And the reason it's doing that is because what we're doing up here in our HTML is when we do this on change function, we're getting, we're creating this new HTML request object, and we're sending out a get. We're opening it with a get method, I think they call it. And this is what we're sending back. We're sending back the slash slider question mark, and then we're appending this value to it. And I'm not sure what the true was, but that's what I left. And then you're just sending it, and that just sends it back to the Pico. So that's why we're getting this slash slider question mark, is because that's what we're telling it to send back, plus this value, which was 43. And then we have to use our splitting, our string splitting, to get that out of that. So the first thing we do is we're splitting on the space. So there's a space here between get and there. So we're splitting on the space, and we're keeping the second part of it. So all we're doing here is getting rid of the get. And then we're doing that. And then we're taking that request, and we're checking that the word slider is in the rest of this, because sometimes there's nothing else, it'll send back a odd string, and it won't have the word slider in it unless it's something that we want. So we're looking for the slider, and what it does is it returns the position of the first instance of slider in our thing. So it's going to be probably the number 1 is what that would return if you did that. But if there happens to be nothing called slider in the rest of that string, it'll return a number 1. So anything above a number 1 is greater than a negative 1 is what we're going to go ahead and do the if part. So then after that, then we're going to take the rest of this. If we do have the word slider, then we know that we're going to also have this question mark in there, so that we're going to split on the question mark, and we want the second part of that. And what we're going to do is we're getting the, and I'm printing that out in the value of that slider. And it ends up being that number 43 down there. So then we're just using that to set the angle of our servo. And with our slow servo, I'm taking a set 1,000 milliseconds to get to it. So anyhow, like I said, I have it running. And let's see. Let me make myself bigger and get out of the way of the servo here. Oh, me. There we go. Maybe you can watch it run. So we'll run it up close to 180. And you can see it took no matter how short a thing, it's still going to take with my slow servo, it's going to take just a second to get to it. So if we go all the way down and all the way up, it's going to look like it's moving faster. But if we just go a little bit, it looks like it's really just moving really slow, because it's still taking that 1 second to get there. So anyhow, that's what I got for the beginning of this. And I can see this being like the steering of a car or something like that, or any kind of projects where you need to move a servo using a slider. This is it's more code than I like to usually write. It's probably the slow servos in 50 lines of code, and this is about 100. Um, and like I said, my skills with HTML and JavaScript are pretty poor, so a lot of copy and pasting there, but I got it working, so that was a good thing. Thumbs up on getting it to work. Along the way, I've been following along with when I'm doing my searching, and I found this guy a while back, but this Donsky Tech, he has a lot of really uh, uh, more advanced uh, MicroPython tutorials on his website. I recommend checking him out if you want to. I'll probably link him in the description as well. Um, he's a small guy. He's got less than 500 subscribers, but he's got some good presentations on there. So I found some things of interest. But he's using this microdot server that actually fits on the just a file that fits on the Raspberry Pi, pretty small, and it allows you to do a lot more with it. Plus, it allows you to separate your HTML and your JavaScript into separate files, so you're not just having to do that F string, format your string to make it look right. So you could actually edit your HTML files in a separate editor, and just copy them into there so that they work. But you don't have to just do it as a string, so that's a good thing. And the same thing with the HTML, and it also allows you to do CSS as well if you want to format your page, which I guess would be important if you were trying to have like an application or something where, like a dashboard that look good. You would probably want to use your CSS, which I know next to nothing about, but just looking at what it does, it makes your web page pretty, I guess, is basically what it does. And so he ends up, when you do it this way, you end up with about 10 files on your Raspberry Pi Pico, and it works. And I've just followed along and copy and paste. He leaves all his stuff on GitHub as well, and I've pasted a couple of or downloaded some of his files and tried them out and looked them over, and they're above my head right now. But doing this project right now got me a lot closer to where he is. And I can see where having it all separated probably would be better than having that formatted string like we got going now. So I'll leave a link to him if you want to check his website out. But anyhow, I'm glad I got it going, and I've been talking long enough. Hope it helps someone. Talk to you later. Have a good day.